A black Uber driver in a simple jacket opens the door for the bride, his smile polite and respectful. She rolls her eyes and says, "Don't talk to me, just drive," before mocking him to her bridesmaids for being just a driver. What she doesn't know is that same driver is Cameron Hayes, the billionaire investor funding her fiancé's startup and the silent partner behind half the venue's ownership. Hours later, when he walks into her wedding reception in a tailored suit, her laughter turns to shock, and her dream night collapses in front of everyone. Before we find out what happens next, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story already has you hooked, hit that like button. The interior of the black SUV was cool and quiet, a welcome escape from the Los Angeles heat shimmering off the pavement. Sunlight glinted off the tinted windows, painting fleeting streaks of light across the plush leather seats. In the back, Olivia Grant, the bride-to-be, was a vision in white, though her dress was still protected by a garment bag. She was already radiating an air of importance, as if the entire city was merely a backdrop for her special day. Her two bridesmaids flanked her, their phones already out, documenting every moment. Their laughter was bright and sharp, filling the confined space of the vehicle. They chattered endlessly about the floral arrangements, the guest list, and the sheer perfection of the venue she had chosen. Olivia preened under the attention, her smile wide and self-satisfied. She felt like a queen surveying her kingdom from a royal carriage. The man in the driver's seat was just a part of the scenery, a silent functionary meant to get her from point A to point B. His name was Cameron, a detail she hadn't bothered to notice when she booked the ride. He drove with a smooth, practiced ease, his hands steady on the wheel. He navigated the bustling downtown traffic without a single jerky movement, his focus entirely on the road. The ride was so seamless that for a moment the chattering in the back seat subsided. A comfortable silence settled in, broken only by the gentle hum of the engine and the whisper of the air conditioning. Cameron glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes briefly meeting Olivia's. He offered a small, polite smile. "Ma'am, is the temperature all right for you back there?" "I can adjust it if you'd like," he offered, his voice calm and even. Olivia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. She stared at his reflection as if he were an insect that had just buzzed too close to her face. She let out a short, incredulous scoff. "Just drive," she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "I don't need commentary from the help." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. The friendly atmosphere in the car evaporated instantly. One of the bridesmaids let out a nervous giggle, unsure how to react. The other quickly raised her phone, hitting record on a TikTok video, a smirk playing on her lips. Cameron's polite smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes. A quiet stillness settled over him. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tiny muscle flexing along his cheek. He said nothing more, simply returning his gaze to the road ahead. His silence was more profound than any argument could have been. It was unsettling. Olivia, however, took it as submission. She felt a surge of satisfaction, believing she had put him in his place. She turned to her friends, her voice now a loud, mocking whisper. "Can you believe it? These fancy Uber drivers think they're your personal concierge now," she said, rolling her eyes dramatically for the camera. The bridesmaids erupted in performative laughter, feeding off her energy. They leaned in close, whispering insults about his simple jacket and his presumed life story. They imagined him living in a tiny apartment, dreaming of one day affording a fraction of the luxury he was currently chauffeuring. They were loud, obnoxious, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. Cameron heard every word. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, his expression unreadable. He was a statue behind the wheel, a silent witness to their casual cruelty. His hands remained steady, his driving flawless. But inside, a quiet decision was beginning to form, solidifying with each giggle and each mocking comment. The camera, still recording on the bridesmaid's phone, panned around the car. It captured Olivia's sneering face, her friend's gleeful expressions, and for a brief second it caught the reflection of the driver's wrist in the rearview mirror. On his wrist was a watch. It wasn't flashy, but it was unmistakable to anyone who knew horology. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a limited edition timepiece worth more than the luxury SUV they were riding in, worth more than the down payment on the condo Olivia was so proud of. But Olivia didn't notice. To her, he was just a driver, an invisible man whose only purpose was to serve her. She had no idea who was really behind the wheel. She had no idea that the silent man she was mocking held her entire future in the palm of his hand. The SUV pulled up smoothly to the grand entrance of the Whitestone Hall Hotel, a towering structure of glass and steel that screamed old-money elegance. The doorman, dressed in a crisp uniform, rushed forward to open the door. Olivia swept out of the vehicle without a backward glance, her bridesmaids trailing in her wake like ladies-in-waiting. She didn't offer a word of thanks. She didn't even acknowledge the driver's existence. Cameron got out of the car, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He walked around to the passenger side and held the door open for the last bridesmaid, a gesture of pure, ingrained politeness. As Olivia passed him on her way to the hotel entrance, she paused for a fraction of a second. She looked him up and down, a smug little smile on her face. "Guess some people know their place," she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. It was a final parting shot, a last twist of the knife to ensure he understood his lowly station in her world. Her friends stifled another round of giggles, delighted by her audacity. One of them, however, didn't laugh. Her name was Riley. She had been quiet for the last few minutes of the ride, her smile strained. As Olivia and the other bridesmaid walked ahead, Riley lingered for a moment. She looked at Cameron, her expression a mixture of apology and embarrassment. She saw the quiet dignity in his eyes, the way he stood tall despite the insults. A pang of guilt shot through her. She wanted to say something, to apologize for her friend's behavior, but the words caught in her throat. She looked away, her cheeks flushing with shame, and hurried to catch up with the others. Cameron watched them go, his face a mask of calm composure. He saw Olivia disappear through the revolving doors, her laughter echoing back into the humid afternoon air. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel hurt. He felt a profound sense of clarity. It was as if a camera lens had snapped into perfect focus. He saw Olivia not just as a rude passenger, but as a symbol of a certain kind of arrogance he had encountered many times before. The arrogance of those who believed their wealth or status made them inherently better than others. He pulled his phone from his pocket. A notification glowed on the screen. It was a calendar reminder. Reminder, 6 p.m. Investor dinner at Whitestone Hall. Finalize partnership with Mark Ellis. He read the words, and then he looked up. His gaze fell upon the gleaming sign above the hotel entrance, the very same hotel Olivia and her friends had just entered. A slow, cold realization washed over him. Mark Ellis, Olivia's fiancé. The pieces clicked into place with a chilling precision. Fate, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. It had not just presented him with an injustice, it had handed him the perfect stage on which to address it. His eyes, which had been calm and observant just moments before, now narrowed. A steely resolve hardened his features. The universe had just dealt him an unexpected hand, and Cameron Hayes was not a man who ever folded. He knew exactly what he had to do. The rehearsal dinner, the celebration of a future built on his investment, was about to become something entirely different. The world knew Cameron Hayes as a titan of industry, a billionaire tech investor who had built a transportation empire from the ground up. His face graced the covers of business magazines, and his name was synonymous with innovation and philanthropy. But the public image was only half the story. To truly understand Cameron, one had to go back to his beginnings, to a small, grease-stained garage in Detroit. He was the son of a mechanic, a man with calloused hands and a heart of gold who taught him the value of hard work and the dignity of a job well done. Cameron spent his youth with his head under the hoods of cars, learning how engines worked, how to diagnose a problem not just with tools, but with instinct. He learned that every part, no matter how small, was essential to making the machine run. It was a lesson he never forgot. He didn't go to an Ivy League school. He worked his way through a state college, driving a cab at night to pay his tuition. It was during those long nights on the city streets that he saw the inefficiencies of the transportation system, the gaps in the market. He saw an opportunity where others saw only problems. With a small loan and an unshakable belief in his idea, he launched his first company, a logistics and software firm that revolutionized urban transport. He built his empire not in a boardroom, but on the ground, understanding the mechanics of the business from the inside out. Now, decades later, he was a man who could buy anything he wanted. He lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city, he flew in private jets, and he commanded the respect of global leaders. But he never forgot the feel of grease under his fingernails. He never forgot the lessons from his father's garage. That was why he still did this. Every few months he would shed his tailored suits and his billionaire persona. He would put on a simple jacket, get behind the wheel of one of his company's high-end cars, and spend a day as a driver. He called it his grounding exercise. It was his way of staying connected to the real world, of observing people when their guards were down. It was his way of remembering that every person, no matter their job, was an essential part of the machine. It was in these moments that he saw the true character of people, stripped bare of pretense. He had seen incredible kindness and startling cruelty. Today, he had seen the latter. Back in his suite at a different hotel across town, Cameron showered and changed. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sprawling city lights. He thought about the upcoming dinner. He was here to finalize a multi-million-dollar investment in a promising tech startup founded by a young, ambitious entrepreneur named Mark Ellis. It was the kind of company he loved to support. Innovative, disruptive, with the potential to change the game. He had been impressed by Mark's vision and drive. He picked up the investment portfolio from his desk, a thick binder filled with projections, market analysis, and bios of the key players. He flipped to the executive summary page. There was Mark's photo, smiling and confident. And right beside it, listed as his fiancée and a future board member of the family trust that held a portion of the company's initial shares, was another photo. It was Olivia Grant. He stared at the picture. It was her. The same smug smile, the same entitled tilt of her head. He recognized her instantly. He closed the binder slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. His demeanor didn't change. There was no flash of anger, no outward sign of his internal turmoil. But a quiet, unshakable decision had settled deep within him. It was as cold and hard as steel. This was no longer just a business deal. It had become a test of character, and Cameron Hayes was about to become the final examiner. The grand ballroom at Whitestone Hall was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto tables draped in white linen. The air hummed with the clinking of glasses and the low murmur of expensive conversations. At the center of it all, Olivia Grant held court. She moved through the room as if she owned it, her laughter loud and commanding. This was her kingdom, and tonight's rehearsal dinner was her coronation. She was no longer just Olivia Grant. She was the future Mrs. Mark Ellis, fiancée to a man on the cusp of becoming a tech mogul. And she wore that future like a diamond necklace, flaunting it for all to see. She bragged openly about the imminent success of Mark's company, her voice laced with a proprietary arrogance. Of course, Mark's lead investor is a billionaire, she announced to a captive audience of friends and family. The man is a genius. He only backs winners. And we, she paused for dramatic effect, flashing her enormous diamond ring, are the biggest winners of all. She didn't know the investor's name, nor did she care. To her, he was just a faceless source of money, a golden ticket to the life she felt she deserved. Her entitlement wasn't limited to her guests. She treated the hotel staff with a casual disdain that made some of them flinch. When a young waiter hesitated for a moment before serving her a glass of champagne, she snapped her fingers at him. "Hello? Over here? The bride. I should be served first, don't you think?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The waiter, a boy no older than 19, flushed a deep red and mumbled an apology. Riley watched the exchange from a nearby table, a knot tightening in her stomach. She saw the flash of humiliation in the waiter's eyes and the cruel satisfaction in Olivia's. She leaned over to another guest, an old college friend. "She's changed so much," Riley whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of the party. "She was never like this before." The friend just shrugged, unwilling to cause a scene. Olivia, oblivious to Riley's comment, let out another loud, braying laugh at something one of her sycophants had said. She felt invincible, untouchable. The world was her oyster, and she was ready to pry it open. Across town, in a silent, minimalist hotel suite, Cameron Hayes was preparing for the same event. He stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his crisp white shirt. He chose a suit of charcoal black, tailored to perfection. It was understated, yet exuded a quiet power. Finally, he reached for his watch. He picked it up from the polished mahogany nightstand and fastened the leather strap around his wrist. It was the same watch he had worn earlier in the day. The Patek Philippe. In the morning, it had been a hidden symbol of his true status, an inside joke only he was privy to. Tonight, it would be a statement, a reminder, a symbol of the reckoning that was about to come. He looked at his reflection, his face calm and composed. He was no longer the invisible driver. He was Cameron Hayes, and he was on his way to a dinner party that would change everyone's lives forever. Riley couldn't enjoy the party. The lavish food tasted like ash in her mouth, and the celebratory music felt like a funeral dirge. The image of the driver's polite, dignified face was seared into her mind. She kept replaying the scene in the car, hearing Olivia's sharp, cruel words and the subsequent mocking laughter. Her own complicit silence felt like a heavy weight on her conscience. She had stood by and said nothing. She had let her friend's cruelty go unchecked, and the shame of it was eating her alive. She felt like an accessory to a crime. A small, quiet one, but a crime against basic human decency, nonetheless. She circulated through the room, trying to force a smile, but her heart wasn't in it. She found herself watching Olivia, really watching her, perhaps for the first time in years. She saw the way Olivia dismissed a busboy with a flick of her wrist, the way she interrupted Mark's parents to talk about herself, the way her eyes scanned the room, constantly assessing who was important enough to talk to. The Olivia she saw tonight was not the friend she had known in college. That Olivia had been fun, a little wild, but she had also been kind. This new Olivia was a stranger, a woman hardened by ambition and an insatiable hunger for status. Later, she overheard the event manager, a severe-looking woman named Eleanor Pierce, complaining to a staff member near the catering station. "Can you believe it? The bride's party was held up. Apparently some Uber driver was taking his sweet time," Eleanor said, her voice laced with disdain. Riley felt a surge of defensiveness. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. "That's not what happened," she said softly. Eleanor turned, her eyes narrowing at the interruption. "Excuse me?" "The driver was perfectly fine," Riley continued, her voice gaining a little strength. "He was polite. Olivia was mean to him." Eleanor stared at her for a long moment, an expression of disbelief on her face. Then she let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Well, it's her wedding day. The bride is always right," she said, turning her back on Riley, making it clear the conversation was over. Riley stood there, feeling small and foolish. No one was listening. No one seemed to care. In their world, a driver's feelings were irrelevant. A bride's whims were law. A deep sense of disillusionment settled over her. This glittering world of wealth and privilege suddenly felt ugly and hollow. It was a world built on a hierarchy where some people were deemed important and others were treated as invisible. At that moment, she made a quiet decision. She would not be a silent bystander anymore. She would watch Olivia. And if the opportunity arose, if there was a moment where it truly mattered, she would find the courage to stand up for what was right. She didn't know how or when, but she knew she had to. Her own integrity depended on it. As the evening wore on and champagne flowed freely, Olivia's arrogance seemed to inflate with every glass she drank. She was the star of the show, and she reveled in the spotlight. Guests mingled, making small talk. But the main topic of conversation was the impending arrival of Mark's mysterious lead investor. The name Cameron Hayes was whispered with a mixture of awe and curiosity. No one seemed to know much about him, only that he was incredibly wealthy and notoriously private. Olivia overheard a group of Mark's business associates discussing the investor. "I hear he's a real visionary," one man said, "but also very eccentric. He came from nothing." Olivia sauntered over, a dismissive smirk on her face. "I just hope he's not one of those socially awkward tech nerds," she joked, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "It would be so boring to have to make small talk with someone who can't even dress himself." Her laughter echoed across the hall, sharp and entitled. A few people chuckled along with her, but others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mark, standing nearby, looked slightly embarrassed by her comment, but he said nothing to challenge her. He was too caught up in the excitement of the evening, too focused on the life-changing partnership that was about to be finalized. Olivia, emboldened by her audience, continued to hold court. She talked down to the catering staff, sending back a plate of hors d'oeuvres because they were artistically uninspired. She bragged incessantly about the future she and Mark would have, a future built on his genius and my good taste. She spoke of their plans to buy a mansion in Beverly Hills, to vacation in the Maldives, to live a life so far removed from ordinary people that they would be like gods on a modern-day Olympus. Riley, who had been watching from a distance, finally approached her. "Olivia, maybe you should slow down a little," she suggested gently, gesturing towards the half-empty bottle of champagne on the table. "You're being a little loud." Olivia turned to her, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Loud? Riley, I'm celebrating. This is the biggest night of my life. You should be happy for me." "I am happy for you," Riley said, choosing her words carefully. "I just think you should be careful how you treat people. The way you spoke to that waiter earlier, it wasn't right." Olivia let out a frustrated sigh, as if Riley were a child who simply didn't understand how the world worked. "Oh, please," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "No one cares how you treat the staff. Nobody who matters, anyway. In this world, there are people who serve and people who are served. That's just the way it is." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let me give you some advice, Riley. Kindness is for the weak. It doesn't get you a mansion or a private jet. Status. Status is everything." She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on Riley's arm for emphasis, then turned and walked away, leaving Riley standing alone. But status, like a delicate champagne bubble, can be beautiful and shimmering one moment and gone the next, leaving behind nothing but a faint mist in the air. Olivia's world was about to pop. While Olivia was basking in the glow of her temporary kingdom, Cameron Hayes was in his hotel suite making a single decisive move. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the city far below. He sat not in a plush armchair, but at the simple wooden desk, the investment portfolio for Mark Ellis's company open before him. He wasn't looking at the financial projections anymore. He was looking at the faces, at the human element of the business. He picked up his phone. He didn't scroll through a long list of contacts. He had one number on speed dial for situations like this. The call connected on the first ring. "Dalton?" A crisp, professional voice answered. "Cameron," he replied, his own voice calm and measured. "I have a situation." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Dalton was Cameron's lead attorney, a man who had been with him for 20 years. He was unflappable, precise, and loyal. He knew that when Cameron Hayes said situation, it meant something significant was about to happen. "What do you need?" Dalton asked, his tone all business. "I've met Mark Ellis's fiancée," Cameron said simply. He didn't need to elaborate. He didn't need to describe the disrespect, the mockery, the casual cruelty. Dalton had known him long enough to understand the implications of that single sentence. Cameron treated respect as a non-negotiable form of currency, more valuable than any dollar amount. "I see," Dalton said. The two words were heavy with meaning. "Bring the board documents to the dinner at Whitestone Hall," Cameron instructed. "The full partnership agreements, the funding clauses, and the character and integrity covenants." "All of them?" Dalton asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. The character covenants were usually a formality, rarely invoked. "All of them," Cameron confirmed. "And bring a projector. I want everyone present when I address this partnership. The board members, the family, everyone." "Consider it done, Cameron. I'm on my way." Cameron hung up the phone. He didn't pace the room. He didn't clench his fists. He simply stood up, walked over to the closet, and slipped on his tailored charcoal jacket. He adjusted the lapels, his movements fluid and economical. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror one last time, his gaze steady and resolute. He was a man on a mission. He walked out of the suite with the quiet, unshakable authority of a man who is not just about to attend a dinner, but to preside over a judgment. The lives he was about to change had no idea he was coming. The ballroom was at the peak of its festive energy. Laughter and music filled the air. Mark Ellis was standing near the head table, accepting congratulations from his friends and future in-laws, his face beaming with pride and excitement. Olivia was by his side, her arm linked through his, a proprietary smile plastered on her face. She felt like she was floating on a cloud of champagne and adoration. Then the grand double doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open. A man stepped inside. He wasn't announced. He didn't make a grand entrance. He simply walked in. But his presence was immediately felt. A subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere, a quiet ripple that started at the entrance and spread outwards. The conversations closest to the door faltered first, then the ones behind them. A hush began to fall over the crowd as heads turned to see who had commanded such unspoken attention. The man was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored black suit. He moved with a quiet confidence, his gaze sweeping across the room. Olivia was in the middle of a sentence, telling a story about her dress fitting, when she noticed the sudden quiet. She turned, an annoyed expression on her face, ready to see what had stolen her spotlight. Her eyes fell on the man at the door. Her smile froze. The champagne glass in her hand trembled slightly. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. It was a face she recognized, but it was completely out of context. It was the face of her Uber driver, the man from the car, the help. But he wasn't wearing a simple jacket anymore. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than her wedding flowers. He wasn't looking down. He was looking at her, his expression unreadable. "Wait," she stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. "That's—" Riley, who was standing a few feet away, followed Olivia's gaze. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The blood drained from her face. It was him, the polite, dignified man from the car. The man Olivia had mocked and humiliated. The man Riley had tried to defend. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She suddenly understood that something monumental was about to happen. Whispers erupted throughout the room. "Isn't that the guy who drove the bride here? What's an Uber driver doing at a private event? Look at his suit. He doesn't look like a driver." Mark, however, was oblivious to the undercurrent of shock and confusion. His face broke into a wide, relieved smile. He excused himself from his conversation and strode eagerly towards the entrance, his hand outstretched. "Mr. Hayes." "Cameron, you made it. We were so excited to hear you were coming in person," he exclaimed, his voice booming with nervous energy. He shook the man's hand warmly. "Everyone, this is him. This is Cameron Hayes, our lead investor." The name hung in the air, electric and charged. Cameron Hayes, the billionaire, the genius, the man Olivia had dismissed as a socially awkward nerd. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Every eye in the ballroom swung from Cameron to Olivia. Her face, which had been flushed with excitement just moments before, was now a ghastly shade of white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color had completely drained from her face, as if her entire world had just been unplugged. In that single frozen moment, as the cameras of 100 smartphones turned to capture her reaction, the bride's perfect world didn't just begin to crumble. It shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Cameron Hayes acknowledged Mark's enthusiastic greeting with a polite nod, his handshake firm and brief. He exuded an aura of calm authority that instantly commanded the room. Mark, still blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded earlier, proudly led him towards the head table. "Sir, we have the seat of honor for you right here next to me," Mark said, gesturing to the empty chair at the head of the long, ornately decorated table. Cameron walked to the table, his steps measured and confident. He took the head seat, the one reserved for the most important guest, the one that put him directly across from Olivia. She was still standing, frozen in place, looking as if she'd seen a ghost. Her hands were shaking so violently that she had to set her champagne glass down on the table before she dropped it. She sank into her chair, her movements stiff and jerky. She couldn't breathe. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and heavy, pressing down on her. Cameron didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, his tone was quiet, measured, yet it carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. "Thank you, Mark," he began, his eyes scanning the faces of the guests, lingering for a moment on Olivia's pale, terrified face. "It's always insightful to get a ground-level view of an investment." He let the words hang in the air, a subtle double meaning that only a few people in the room understood. Olivia felt a cold dread creep up her spine. He knew. Of course he knew. He continued, his gaze now sweeping over the board members and family seated at the table. "You know," he said, his voice conversational but laced with an undercurrent of steel. "You never truly know who's in the driver's seat of your life. You never know who's driving your success." He paused, his eyes locking directly with Olivia's. "Or your downfall." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The guests were no longer just attendees at a party. They were a captive audience at a high-stakes drama. They exchanged nervous glances, whispering behind their hands, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click into place. Riley watched from her table, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Olivia, not with triumph, but with a quiet, profound disappointment. She saw the panic in her friend's eyes, the complete unraveling of the arrogant queen who had held court just minutes before. Olivia's father, a portly man with a red, flustered face, clearly felt the need to intervene. He started to rise from his chair, a placating smile already forming on his lips. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sure there's just been a small misunderstanding," he began. Cameron didn't even turn to look at him. He simply raised a hand, a small, subtle gesture, but it was enough. The authority in that simple movement was absolute. Olivia's father stopped talking and slowly sank back into his seat, his face now a mask of confusion and alarm. Cameron Hayes owned this room. He owned the company. He owned the future. And everyone, especially Olivia, was about to find out the price of disrespecting the man behind the wheel. The tension in the room was now a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. Cameron Hayes sat at the head of the table, the calm center of the storm he had created. He gave a subtle nod towards the back of the ballroom. On cue, Mr. Dalton, his lawyer, stepped forward. He was a sharp, silver-haired man in a conservative suit, carrying a laptop and a small projector. He moved with quiet efficiency, setting up the equipment on a small table. A large white screen descended from the ceiling, humming softly. The guests watched in bewildered silence, their dinner forgotten. What was happening? Was this part of a business presentation? Mark looked utterly confused, turning to Cameron with a questioning expression. "Sir, what is this?" Cameron didn't answer him directly. He simply waited until Mr. Dalton gave him a nod, indicating that everything was ready. Then Cameron spoke, his voice still calm, but now with a sharp edge of command. "Before we discuss the final details of this multi-million-dollar partnership," he said, addressing the room, "I believe in full transparency. I believe character is the foundation of any successful venture." He gestured towards the screen. "Mr. Dalton, if you would." Mr. Dalton clicked a button on his laptop. The projector whirred to life, casting a bright rectangle of light onto the screen. An image appeared. It was a screenshot from a video. The quality was unmistakable. It was from a smartphone. The image showed the inside of a car. It showed a group of young women laughing. And in the center of the frame, captured in crystal-clear detail, was Olivia. Her head was thrown back in laughter, her face twisted into a cruel, mocking sneer. The angle was from the side, a candid shot of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. It was a sound like the wind being knocked out of 100 people at once. Olivia stared at the screen, her own face mocking her from above. She recognized the image instantly. It was from her bridesmaid's phone, from the TikTok video they had filmed in the car. It had already been posted. It was already online. The humiliation washed over her in a hot, sickening wave. It was a joke," she cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. Tears began to stream down her face, carving paths through her perfect makeup. "We were just having fun. It didn't mean anything." Cameron's expression remained unchanged. He was a statue of composure, his gaze unwavering. "A joke?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "You mocked the man who was driving you to the celebration of your future. You laughed at the idea of a person working for a living. You assumed his place was beneath yours." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into hers. "You weren't driven here by the help, Ms. Grant. You were driven here by your own arrogance." The audience was completely stunned. They sat frozen, a tableau of shock and disbelief. Phones were now out, not just taking pictures, but recording, streaming this unbelievable public meltdown for the world to see. In the midst of the suffocating silence, a single clear voice spoke up. It was Riley. She had stood up from her table, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. "It's true," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "I was there. He was polite, and she was cruel." She looked directly at Cameron, then at the silent, watching crowd. She told him to know his place. The confirmation, coming from one of the bride's own bridesmaids, was the final damning piece of evidence. It was the nail in the coffin of Olivia's character, hammered home in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. The room was a pressure cooker of shame and shock. Mark Ellis looked as if he had been physically struck. He stared at the image on the screen, then at Olivia's tear-streaked face, then at the calm, resolute investor who held his entire future in his hands. The dots connected in his mind with horrifying clarity. The woman he was about to marry, the person he thought he knew, had casually insulted the very man who was about to make all their dreams come true. The humiliation was crushing. Cameron finally turned his attention to Mark. His voice was no longer soft. It was cold, hard, and final. "Mark, I saw great potential in your vision," he said. "But a company is more than just a product. It's about the people. It's about the culture. I cannot and will not back any company led by someone who shares the mindset I witnessed today. An organization that tolerates that kind of arrogance at the top is rotten from the start." Mark's face crumpled. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't look at Olivia. He looked only at Cameron. "Mr. Hayes, sir, I am so deeply sorry," he stammered, his voice thick with mortification. "I had no idea. This is not what my company stands for. It's not what I stand for." He took a deep breath, and in that moment, he made a choice. He chose his future over his fiancée. He turned to the stunned audience. "I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Hayes for the disgusting behavior he was subjected to, and—" He hesitated, his voice breaking. "And in light of this, I cannot go through with this wedding. The engagement is off." A collective gasp went through the room. Olivia let out a sob, a raw, wounded sound that was quickly drowned out by the clicking of phone cameras. Her mascara, once perfectly applied, now ran in black rivers down her cheeks. She sank into her chair, a broken doll in a designer dress, her entire world collapsing in a blaze of public shame. Her father, seeing his family's reputation and financial stake in the company dissolving before his eyes, stood up and tried to speak, but no words came. He looked from his weeping daughter to the immovable figure of Cameron Hayes. Defeated, he turned and walked out of the ballroom, his shoulders slumped in shame. Cameron then addressed the board members present. "As per Section 7, Paragraph 4 of our initial funding agreement, the Character and Integrity Covenant, I am exercising my right to reevaluate all partnerships connected to this venture." He looked at Mr. Dalton, who was already holding up the relevant documents. "I propose an immediate vote to remove the Grant Family Trust as secondary sponsors." The vote was swift and unanimous. With a few quiet words, Olivia's family was cut off, their name and money now toxic assets. Her world had turned pale, her dreams dissolving under the harsh, unforgiving light of truth. She was no longer a queen in her kingdom. She was a pariah, a spectacle, a cautionary tale whispered about in the very room she had longed to command. The beautiful decorations now seemed to mock her, silent witnesses to her spectacular fall from grace. In the aftermath of the collapse, as Olivia sat weeping in her chair, a new focal point emerged in the room. Cameron Hayes turned his attention away from the wreckage of Olivia's life and looked across the ballroom. His eyes found Riley. She was still standing by her table, looking pale but resolute. "Young lady," Cameron said, his voice now warm and respectful, "could you please step forward?" Riley looked around, confused, thinking he must be speaking to someone else. But all eyes were on her. Hesitantly, she made her way through the tables, the crowd parting for her as she walked towards the head table. She stood before Cameron Hayes, her heart pounding. "I want to thank you," Cameron said, his voice clear and strong, for everyone to hear. "I want to thank you for your quiet decency. In a moment when it was easier to laugh along, when it was easier to stay silent, you chose kindness. You chose integrity." He looked out at the guests, at the board members, at Mark. "We need more people like you in the world. People who are not afraid to stand up for what is right, even when no one is watching." Riley was speechless. She felt a blush creep up her neck. She had only done what she thought was right, what her conscience had demanded of her. She never expected to be acknowledged, let alone praised, in front of this powerful assembly. The room, which had been filled with shocked whispers just moments before, now broke into a spontaneous and thunderous round of applause. It was applause for Riley, for her simple act of courage. It was a release of the tension, a collective endorsement of decency over arrogance. Riley smiled nervously, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Cameron wasn't finished. "My foundation runs several philanthropic initiatives," he continued once the applause had died down. "One of them focuses on promoting ethical leadership and workplace respect. It needs a new director of community outreach, a person with a strong moral compass." He looked directly at Riley. "I think you would be perfect for the position. If you're interested, the job is yours." Riley's jaw dropped. A job offer? Here? Now? It was surreal. She had come here tonight as a bridesmaid, a reluctant participant in a charade of wealth. She was leaving with a career opportunity beyond her wildest dreams, offered by one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the country. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, of course. Thank you." From her seat of shame, Olivia watched the entire exchange. She saw Riley, the friend she had dismissed and ignored, being celebrated. She saw her being rewarded for the very quality, kindness, that she had mocked as a weakness. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. In that moment, she finally understood the true cost of her actions. She hadn't just lost a fiancé and a future of wealth. She had lost her dignity. She had destroyed her own character with her own words, her own arrogance, and she had no one to blame but herself. The event, which had started as a celebration, ended in a somber, awkward silence. Guests began to leave quickly, eager to escape the charged atmosphere, their phones buzzing with the news they were about to spread. The staff, who had earlier been treated with such disdain by Olivia, now moved about their duties, clearing plates and glasses with quiet professionalism, their faces betraying nothing but a hint of vindicated satisfaction. Soon the grand ballroom was nearly empty. Olivia sat alone at the massive head table, a solitary figure amidst the debris of her shattered dreams. The beautiful floral centerpieces drooped slightly under the lights. The half-empty champagne glasses and discarded napkins were stark reminders of the party that had died a sudden, violent death. Her wedding decorations, the symbols of a perfect future she had so carefully planned, now seemed to sparkle with a cold, mocking light. They were monuments to a life that would now never be. Her tears had long since dried, leaving her with a hollow, empty feeling. She was no longer angry or sad. She was just nothing. A ghost at a feast that was never meant to be hers. Outside the hotel, Cameron Hayes left as quietly as he had arrived. He didn't stay for congratulations or further discussions. His work was done. He walked past the valets and the lingering guests, a figure of quiet power moving through the night. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't reveled in Olivia's humiliation. He had simply held up a mirror and forced her to look at her own reflection. He never needed revenge. He just needed the truth to be seen. As his car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the city traffic, the moral of the evening landed with a heavy, unshakable finality. When you disrespect others, you are not defining them. You are not putting them in their place. You are exposing your own character, your own insecurities, your own ugliness for the entire world to see. You are revealing exactly who you are, not who they are, and sometimes the world is watching more closely than you think. In the weeks that followed the disastrous rehearsal dinner, the ripple effects of that night continued to spread. Mark Ellis's tech company, now free from the shadow of the Grant family's toxic reputation, flourished under Cameron Hayes' direct guidance. With the funding secured and a renewed focus on building a culture of respect from the ground up, the startup hit all its projected targets and became one of the year's most celebrated success stories. Mark, humbled and changed by the experience, dedicated himself to his work with a new sense of purpose. Riley Chen, true to Cameron's word, stepped into her new role at his foundation. She was a natural. Her innate decency and quiet strength made her the perfect face for a new national Respect First campaign. The initiative, funded by Cameron, aimed to teach the importance of character and integrity in schools and workplaces. Riley became an unlikely but powerful public figure, her story inspiring thousands. She had not sought the spotlight, but she used it to champion the simple idea that kindness is a strength, not a weakness. And Olivia? Her story went viral. The video clips from the dinner, the photos of her shocked face, the story of her cruel comments in the car. It all became a national sensation. News outlets and social media commentators dubbed it the Billionaire Uber lesson. She became a meme, a punchline, a modern-day fable about the dangers of arrogance and the illusion of status. Her name became synonymous with entitlement. She was forced to retreat from public life, her social circle abandoning her dreams of a high society life turning to dust. The humiliation was absolute and inescapable. She had craved status above all else, and in a way, she had achieved it. She was famous now, but for all the wrong reasons. She was a living, breathing cautionary tale, a lesson taught in the unforgiving classroom of public opinion about the true meaning of class and character. In a world where pride often speaks louder than kindness, where status is mistaken for worth, it is easy to forget a simple truth. The person you look down on today, the person you dismiss as unimportant, the person you believe is beneath you, might just own the road you are walking on tomorrow. They might be the architect of the building you enter, the investor in the company that employs you, or the silent force holding the keys to the future you so desperately crave. Character is not measured by the car you ride in, but by how you treat the person driving it. True power is not about making others feel small. It is about having the strength to be humble, the grace to be kind, and the wisdom to see the value in every single person. The story of the bride and the billionaire faded from the headlines, as all stories do. But its lesson lingered. It became a quiet reminder, a whisper in the back of the mind. And far away from the noise and the fallout, on a quiet afternoon, a sleek black SUV moved through the city streets. Behind the wheel sat a man in a simple jacket, his expression calm, his hands steady. He was just a driver, observing the world through his windshield, a billionaire who never forgot the value of hard work, the importance of respect, and the enduring power of human dignity. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.